I'm Jaliza, author, professional overthinker, and the person who wrote the story you're about to hear. This is a video series where I introduce my newest book to you by reading the first chapter, because sometimes the best way to decide if a story is for you is to let the author read it out loud. Quick disclaimer, I am not a storyteller, I am a story writer, which means my dictation may be questionable, my pacing occasionally chaotic, and I will absolutely trip over my own sentences. It'll be fun when I have to actually say names and locations out loud. I also won't be doing voices because I am not a voice actor and no one deserves that. But the story I've got. So settle in, forgive the reading, and let's begin. Today, I'm introducing Reapermarked, the first book in my new series called Ever Unlasting, following Dalia Walcott, one of the few humans alive, bound to death by choice and hunted by the dark elf who once enslaved her, just as her final year to live begins. If you still aren't sure, here's some fun tropes for you to keep in mind. If you like your stories with a playful Grim Reaper, a deal with death, an overprotective shifter, a ride-or-die best friend, and a stubborn main character, plus, yes, a love triangle, then you're in the right place. Now to begin chapter 1 of this urban fantasy romance book in my Ever Unlasting series. The pharaoh ducked through the first set of doors, his lanky frame barely squeezing inside. He looked like something stretched too far. Long limbs, long face, a nose that hooked like a crow's beak, and lips so thin they seemed to peel back into a dark abyss whenever he spoke. He wore nothing but a cloth draped around his waist and hanging between his legs. There was no question about his gender. Without a word, he produced a card out of thin air and held it out to the guards. They gave the small plastic rectangle a sharp look before scanning him with a device that buzzed and blinked with strange colors. Satisfied, they returned his card and nodded him through. Just another day at my restaurant. I stayed busy cashing out takeout customers, trying not to watch as the pharaoh male slid into a booth across from another of his kind, this one unmistakably female. She wore even less, a thong and a cloth strap barely covering her chest. She tilted her head slightly as he joined her, their thin bodies nearly mirror images of each other, save for the subtle curves and sharp grace of her movements. Bailey, unbothered as always, sauntered over to take their order without hesitation. No one paid any attention to them. It was just how it was, considering non-humans outnumbered humans by far. In fact, my best friend, her boyfriend, and I were the only humans currently in the restaurant. The last stat I heard said there was one human for every 2,000 pharaohs. I figured that was optimistic, especially since so many pharaohs refused to leave Terra to get a taste of civilization. This was my normal. After deciding humans couldn't be trusted to take care of the world, the pharaohs emerged from whatever hidden realm, alternative dimension, or ancient cave they had been hiding in and tossed humans off the top of the food chain. Hard. They didn't just push us down, they buried us. The takeover, they called it. 115 years of humans scrambling to survive while the pharaohs turned the world on its head, and we failed miserably. Eventually, a group of pharaohs decided that maybe wiping us out wasn't necessary. The genocide stopped. What followed was the Black Period. 30 years of being protected but having all our inventions and history systematically erased. They only kept what was deemed safe and unuseful, the rest gone. The pharaohs wanted no trace of the world we built, the one that was polluted, destroyed, and tore itself apart with war. And really, who could blame them? I've seen some of the images, the reminders, the wreckage, and talking with some of the older pharaohs, like really talking to them, you'd hear the stories, the atrocities humans committed, not just against others, but against each other. No wonder they thought of us as a plague. So now we were protected as an endangered species, and we got to meet all kinds of beings in all different shapes, sizes, and attitudes, like the Varnin, who joined his female friend. They were gentle folks who enjoyed fish and anything sour. The female turned her head and stared at me for a long moment before lifting her arm and waving long fingers at me, the extra joy in them causing them to curl a little more. I smiled in acknowledgement. The couple came in twice a week to me. I suspected an affair, but kept my mouth shut. Wasn't my business. I busied myself with taking an order while keeping an eye on a different couple tucked into a corner only a few spots over. Two humans were having an important talk. From my point of view, it looked one-sided. Camila Lena said her piece, and now her soon-to-be ex was going at it, his hands moving in angry flurry. Cammy should consider herself lucky that I hadn't gone over there and given her current conquest a piece of my mind. He had kept her up crying a couple of times this past week, and I was sick of it. Though I was proud of her for finally giving him that damn breakup talk she'd been promising to give for the past month. Cammy sat still, her dark brown hair pulled back in a short ponytail, and she wore very little makeup. Joe sat across from her, practically scowling, but what could he do? While any conflict between humans was swiftly dealt with, he was still too nice to force anything on her. Not that I would let him. He was just needy, and we couldn't afford needy. I'd had the pleasure of kicking him out of her apartment once with a simple excuse like we already had plans. That had become the moment he decided he didn't like me. Unfortunately for him, Cammy and I were a package deal, practically joined at the hips. He learned that rather quickly too. You aren't even pretending to work anymore, Dalia, Bailey said with a smile as she came over and took the notepad away from me. She glanced down at it and then shook her head, giving me a little hip bump to move me out of the way. Giving her a sheepish smile, I said, I'm going on break. She laughed. Of course you are. Bailey knew me all too well. Cammy glanced my way, and I gave her my best sympathetic smile. After I passed the responsibility over to Bailey, I went back to being overprotective of Cammy. Cammy was focused on Joe again. The tension grew thick, and I could see the strain around her eyes intensify, extra wrinkles appearing where they shouldn't. My protective instincts yelled at me to march over there and throw him out on his ass. My cautious side told me to just wait and then comfort her after he left. Finally, Cammy nodded and Joe stood up, resigned to his lonely fate. They were officially over, and nothing short of my delicious apple tart was going to change her mind. Not that I was handing over my desserts for him to use against Cammy. Joe said something to at least get the last word in before shaking his head and taking off, barely acknowledging the guards when they opened the doors for him. Cammy's shoulders hunched down briefly as she took a moment to collect herself. I stayed far enough away to give her that privacy, but I was there, ready to pounce and give her any comfort that she needed, my own heart aching for her. Finally, she straightened her posture and turned to me with a strained smile. I returned it, knowing she knew I watched the whole thing. In fact, she knew the very moment I began watching her breakup talk. Our sense of each other was way above the norm of humans. It had always been like that since we were children. Time had really bonded us together, tighter and tighter every year, quite literally. I went to join her, putting a little more sway into my hips than normal, knowing the males were looking. Fashion was my obsession, and some of the male customers appreciated that. I donned a red top that fluttered when I walked, paired with jean shorts and light brown flats. They could look all they wanted as long as they didn't touch, and they left a nice tip, which was what they usually did. Hey, babe. I leaned over and gave Cammy a hug, kissing her cheek. Is it finally done? She eyed me. You know it is. Why do I always date the ones who want a real relationship, commitment, and all that jazz? I understood her perfectly. We weren't exactly the type to get attached, and it really tickled men when we didn't. It wasn't like we weren't upfront about it either, but I don't know. Suddenly it got to that attachment point and we'd be forced to cut ties. Well, who needs him? I sat across from her and gave her hand a squeeze. Her smile was tight as she smiled, but at least she was still smiling. I didn't want to think about what the day would be like if Cammy couldn't smile. After a day of venting, she would be over the man and on to the next conquest. It was how it worked for both of us. No strings attached. It was our number one rule. Cammy eyed me. What? I asked. You look like you put a little extra care into what you're wearing. I always put in extra care. True. She nodded as she pursed her lips. Her gaze went down my body and then back up. But it looks like you put in extra care. I shrugged. What's wrong? What happened? What makes you think something happened? Because you like to get extra dressed up if you're going on a date or if you're really stressed. You aren't dating anyone right now. Aren't you supposed to be going to work? I asked as a lame attempt to change the topic. She didn't fall for it. She never did. It's Saturday. The good part of being a number cruncher is that I rarely have to work on weekends, but you should be working. Well, when I saw you and that idiot talking and it all going downhill, I decided it was break time in case I had to break someone's face in. Uh-huh. And what would your boss think of that? Who knows? I shrugged. It isn't like Daryl is ever around anyway. And that's why you're stressed about something. Oh, she was good. Too good. I responded with a cryptic smile, making her scowl. Fine. I'm just being too aware of things. That's all. Nothing big. She stared at me in disbelief. Needing her to believe me, I raised my voice slightly. I swear. It wasn't like I could tell her my nightmares were rearing their ugly heads again. I would get through them eventually. I always did. And so for now, I was going to dress up and make myself feel special and pretty because damn it all to hell and back again, I need to feel special and pretty. Are you still with me? Dalia asked, reaching over and brushing her fingers against my wrist. I'm still here, I said, and I swear, I'm fine. I just want to feel good today. She smiled, but it was tight around the edges because she knew I was bullshitting her. Fine. You better get back to work. I nodded. We sat there and stared at each other instead. Cammy finally gave me a small smile and looked around, taking in the simple layout. There were plenty of customers, filling more than 70% of the tables, enjoying their food amidst pleasant conversations. We weren't too busy, but there was enough to keep us moving. Bailey was bustling around, fetching refills for all the ferals. Some of the drinks were questionable, and I didn't ask because I really didn't want to know what went into a gnome's drink or a banshee's. I knew about 3/4 of the items on our menu, and could make about half of them myself. The rest I left up to my amazing chef, Megan. She knew how to make all the ferals happier than I did. It was why I was paying her the big bucks, giving her the control over the kitchen. Daryl should sell you this place. You're the one who keeps it going. Nah, he won't ever do it, I replied with a snort. I'm a human. I said the word as if it were a disease. To some supernatural beings, it was. To others, it was on par with saying dinner. We eyed each other for a moment in complete understanding before we broke out into giggles. I stood back up and patted her shoulder. My place tonight? I'm done at 7. Not closing tonight? She cocked one of her coppery honey eyes, or in layman's term brown, but brown didn't do them justice. They were copper on top of honey, and when she was worked up and emotional, flecks of orange shone through, and whenever she looked at me, they were always warm and accepting. I'm testing out the new guy, seeing how he does. Bring wine and don't be late. I leaned over and pecked her on the cheek before making my way to the kitchen to check on things, and hopefully, finally, cornering Megan to see if she wanted to add anything to the new menu that was coming out next month. The older woman hovered over steaming, boiling pots, filling bowls with her famous chicken chili. Her red eyes narrowed in focus. There was some kind of raw meat on a nearby cutting board that one of her sous chefs were preparing. I knew it was tonight's chef's special. Once in a while, Megan got her hands on meat from Tara. I let the pro decide what she wanted the chef's special to be, since I had no clue what one would do with serpent meat or who would even be interested in devouring it. To me, serpent meat always looked like a big, rotten blob. Hey, Maggie, I said in a chipper voice, enjoying the way Megan flinched when she heard her nickname. Got anything new you wanted to add to the menu? Her voice twisted up and she shook her head. No, I looked it over last night and I thought it was solid. She cocked one of her blonde eyebrows at me, especially the specials. I grinned. I figured the specials would give something for the men to think about other than my ass. She laughed, her red eyes turning pink as they twinkled. Cheers to that. I left her to work her magic and holed up in my small office at the back of the restaurant, preparing to spend a few hours there. And that's the end of chapter 1. If you're intrigued, confused, or already picking a favorite, that's exactly where you're supposed to be. Thank you for spending a little time in this world with me. If you want to keep going, the book is available now, and if not, I still appreciate you being here. I'll see you in the next chapter.